trailer at the edge of the riverside salvage yard, where her grandmother worked as a bookkeeper for Mr. Donovan, the owner. Eleanor spent most of her days wandering among the twisted metal and discarded cars, creating imaginary worlds in the ruins of other people's forgotten belongings. She was small for her age, with tangled light brown hair that always seemed to escape, whatever way her grandmother tried to style it. Her clothes were clean but worn, hand-me-downs from the church donation box. Her face was distinctive. She had a port wine birthmark that covered the left side of her face, stretching from her temple down to her jawline. It was something she'd learned to live with, though the stares from strangers never quite stopped hurting. On this particular sunny afternoon, Eleanor was exploring a newly arrived vehicle, a black sedan that still looked relatively intact compared to most of the junk in the yard. She circled it curiously, noting its expensive make. It seemed odd that such a nice car would end up here. That's when she heard it. A muffled thumping sound coming from the trunk. Eleanor froze, her heart pounding. The sound came again, more urgent this time. She looked around the salvage yard, but there was no one in sight. Her grandmother was in the office trailer, and Mr. Donovan had gone into town for supplies. She approached the trunk carefully. "Hello?" she called out tentatively. The thumping became frantic. A muffled voice, desperate and unintelligible, came from inside. Eleanor's hands shook as she tried the trunk release, but it was locked. She looked around frantically for something to help. Finally, she spotted a crowbar leaning against a nearby pile of scrap metal. It took all her strength to carry it back to the car. "I'm going to try to open it," she called to whoever was inside. "Hold on." It took several attempts, her small hands struggling with the heavy tool. But finally, the trunk popped open with a metallic groan. Inside was a man bound with rope and gagged with duct tape. He was in his early 40s with dark wavy hair and a face bruised and bloodied. His gray-green suit was torn and dirty. When he saw Eleanor, his eyes widened, and he made urgent sounds against the gag. Eleanor's hands trembled as she reached forward and carefully peeled back the tape from his mouth. The man gasped for air. "Thank God," he breathed. "Thank God. Please untie me quickly." Eleanor worked at the knots with her small fingers. They were tight and complex, but she was patient, picking at them until they finally loosened. As soon as his hands were free, the man helped her with the rest of the rope around his legs. He climbed out of the trunk awkwardly, wincing in pain, and leaned against the car. He looked around the salvage yard, then down at Eleanor. For a long moment, he just stared at her face, his expression unreadable. Eleanor instinctively touched her birthmark, a habit she'd developed whenever people stared. She looked down at her worn sneakers. "Are you okay, mister? Should I get my grandma or call the police?" The man continued to stare at her, and something strange happened to his expression. His eyes filled with tears, and he sank down to his knees, bringing himself to her eye level. His hand reached out slowly, trembling toward her face, then stopped just short of touching her. "What's your name?" he asked, his voice hoarse and thick with emotion. "Eleanor." "Eleanor Hayes, what's yours?" "William." "William Hartley." He was still staring at her face, particularly at her birthmark. "How old are you, Eleanor?" 10. I'll be 11 in February. She shifted uncomfortably. "Are you sure you're okay? You're crying." William wiped his eyes roughly with the back of his hand. "Eleanor, I need to ask you something very important. Do you live here? With your parents?" "With my grandma. My parents died when I was little. Car accident. I don't really remember them." She studied him with concern. "You're hurt. Let me get Grandma Ruth. She can help." "Wait," William caught her arm gently. "Before you go, please tell me your grandmother. What's her full name?" "Ruth Hayes. Why?" William closed his eyes and more tears streamed down his face. "And your mother's name? Do you know what it was?" Eleanor found his questions odd, but something in his manner made her answer. "Caroline. Caroline Hayes. She kept her maiden name," Grandma said. "She and my dad weren't married long before the accident." William made a sound that was somewhere between a laugh and a sob. He reached into his jacket pocket with shaking hands and pulled out a wallet. It was expensive leather worn at the edges. From it, he extracted a photograph protected in a plastic sleeve. He held it out to Eleanor. "Do you recognize this woman?" Eleanor took the photo carefully. It showed a young woman, maybe in her early 20s, with light brown hair and a beautiful smile. And on the left side of her face, stretching from temple to jaw, was a port wine birthmark identical to Eleanor's. Eleanor's breath caught. She looks like me. Who is she? Her name was Caroline. Caroline Hartley. She was my daughter. William's voice broke. She ran away from home when she was 19. We'd had a terrible fight about so many things. I said horrible things to her. I told her she was foolish, that she'd never make it on her own. I was trying to control her life, to make her into what I wanted instead of letting her be who she was. She left, and I was too proud, too stubborn to go after her. I thought she'd come back. I thought I had time. He touched the photograph gently. I hired investigators to find her. It took 2 years, but they finally located her in this area. By the time they did, she was already gone. Car accident, they said. She was 21 years old. They told me she'd had a baby, but there was no record of what happened to the child. The investigators couldn't find any trail. I've been searching for 10 years, Eleanor. 10 years trying to find my granddaughter. Eleanor felt dizzy. You think I'm... But my dad... What was his name? James Novak. That's what Grandma told me. William nodded slowly. The investigators found a marriage certificate. Caroline Hayes married James Novak 6 months before the accident. But there was something else they discovered. He paused, choosing his words carefully. Your grandmother, Ruth Hayes. She was actually Ruth Novak. James was her son. After the accident, after she lost both her son and her daughter-in-law, she took you and moved here. Changed back to her maiden name. The investigators lost the trail because they were looking for Ruth Novak with a granddaughter. Not Ruth Hayes. Eleanor shook her head, trying to process this information. You're saying you're my grandfather? My other grandfather? I believe so. Eleanor, your birthmark, it's hereditary. It ran in my family. My daughter had it. My grandmother had it. The odds of 2 unrelated people having identical birthmarks in the exact same location are astronomical. Eleanor touched her birthmark again, but this time with wonder rather than self-consciousness. My mom had this too? Yes, and she was beautiful just like you are. William's voice was fierce. She hated it when she was young. People stared. Other children were cruel. But as she grew older, she came to see it as what made her unique. She was magnificent, Eleanor. Strong and brave and kind. And I was a fool who drove her away. Eleanor sat down on the ground, her legs suddenly weak. William sat beside her, still moving stiffly from his ordeal. What happened to you? Eleanor asked. Why were you tied up in that trunk? Business rivals, William said grimly. I'm the CEO of Hartley Pharmaceuticals. Some competitors wanted to convince me to sell my company. When I refused, they decided to be more persuasive. They grabbed me 3 days ago. I don't know what they were planning. But I think bringing the car to this salvage yard was meant to be the end. Eleanor's eyes widened. They were going to kill you? Probably. If you hadn't found me... He shook his head. You saved my life, Eleanor. They sat in silence for a moment, surrounded by the ruins of the salvage yard. Finally, Eleanor spoke. Are you sure? That I'm your granddaughter? We can do a DNA test to be certain. But Eleanor, I'm as sure as I can be. Your age is right. Your mother's name. The birthmark. The timing. Everything fits. And what happens then? If the test says yes? William turned to look at her fully. Then I hope you'll let me be part of your life. I know I have no right to ask. I failed your mother. I let my pride and my need for control drive her away. I have to live with that every day, knowing that if I'd been a better father, she might still be alive. But I promise you, Eleanor, I will never make those mistakes again. What about Grandma Ruth? We'll figure it out together. If she's been raising you all these years, then she's the one who was there when I wasn't. She deserves respect and gratitude. I'm not trying to take you away from her. I'm just asking for a chance to know you, to be your grandfather. Eleanor studied his face, this stranger who claimed to be family. Despite the bruises and blood, despite the exhaustion in his eyes, she saw something sincere there, something that felt real. We should get you help, she said, standing up. You need a doctor, and we should call the police about the people who hurt you. William stood too, groaning slightly. You're right. But first, can I ask you one more thing? Okay. Do you have any pictures of your mother? Of Caroline. Eleanor shook her head sadly. Grandma said they were all lost in the accident. All we have is one photo, but it's not very clear. Grandma keeps it in her bedroom. William's face fell, but he nodded. I have many photos, albums full. If you'll let me, I'd like to show them to you someday, to tell you about her, all the things I should have told her when I had the chance. They walked together toward the office trailer, Eleanor matching her pace to William's injured gait. When they opened the door, Grandma Ruth looked up from her paperwork, her eyes widening at the sight of the bloodied man. Eleanor! Get away from him! She stood up quickly, reaching for the phone. It's okay, Grandma, Eleanor said. He's not dangerous. He was tied up in a trunk. I found him. And Grandma, she paused, looking at William, who nodded encouragingly. He says he's my other grandfather. Mom's father. Ruth froze, her hand hovering over the phone. She looked at William, really looked at him, and something in her expression shifted. William Hartley. You know who I am? Caroline talked about you before... Ruth's voice caught. Before the accident. She was thinking about reaching out. She said maybe enough time had passed. That maybe you could meet your grandchild? Tears filled her eyes. But then the accident happened, and I couldn't face telling you. I'd lost my son. Caroline was like a daughter to me. And Eleanor was all I had left. I was afraid you'd try to take her, that I'd lose her too. William's own eyes welled up again. I would never take her from you, never. You've been there for her. When I couldn't be. When I didn't even know she existed. I owe you a debt I can never repay. Over the next hours, after the police were called and William was treated at the hospital, the pieces of the story came together. DNA tests were ordered, though everyone already knew what they would show. William's kidnappers were arrested. Within days, corporate rivals who'd made a desperate and criminal mistake. But the real story was the one that unfolded more slowly, over weeks and months. The story of a grandfather who'd lost his daughter and found his granddaughter. Of a woman who'd raised a child alone and learned to share that responsibility. Of a girl who'd spent her life with one grandmother and gained a grandfather who looked at her. Birthmark, not with pity or discomfort, but with love and recognition. William didn't try to change Eleanor's life overnight. He visited regularly, always coordinating with Ruth. He set up trust funds for Eleanor's education and for Ruth's security, but he was careful not to overwhelm them with money. More importantly, he showed up for school plays and report cards and ordinary Tuesdays. He kept his promise about the photographs. One Sunday, he brought 3 photo albums to the trailer and sat with Eleanor for hours, showing her pictures of her mother at every age. Caroline as a baby, as a child, as a teenager. Caroline with the same birthmark, the same smile, the same light in her eyes that Eleanor had. She loved art, William told her, pointing to a picture of Caroline at an easel. She wanted to be a painter. I told her it wasn't practical, that she needed to study business or law. That was one of the things we fought about. I like to draw, Eleanor said quietly. William looked at her with such intensity that she almost looked away. Then you should draw. As much as you want. I'll buy you supplies. I'll get you lessons. Whatever you need. Because I learned something too late with your mother. Following your passion isn't impractical. It's essential. It's what makes life worth living. As Eleanor grew older, William became a constant presence in her life. He and Ruth developed a respectful, even warm relationship, united in their love for Eleanor. They celebrated holidays together, shared stories about Caroline, and created new traditions. When Eleanor was in high school, struggling with the way some classmates treated her because of her birthmark, it was William who sat with her and told her the truth. Your mother struggled with this too, and I failed her then by not teaching her what I learned later. That the people who judge you for your appearance aren't worth knowing. The birthmark isn't a flaw, Eleanor. It's part of what makes you who you are. It connects you to your mother, to your great-grandmother, to a family line of strong, remarkable women. Anyone who can't see past it to the person you are doesn't deserve your time. Eleanor started an art program at her school for students with visible differences, a way to help others like her find confidence through creative expression. William funded it, but it was Eleanor's vision, Eleanor's passion. She was becoming the woman her mother might have been if she'd lived. On Eleanor's 18th birthday, William gave her a gift. It was a large portfolio, and inside were dozens of paintings, her mother's work, discovered in a storage unit William had maintained for years without even remembering what was in it. "I found these last month," William explained. "I'd put her things in storage after she left, too angry to look at them. Then I forgot they were even there. But I was going through my financial records and I saw the storage unit fee. When I opened it, I found these." Eleanor looked through the paintings with tears streaming down her face. They were beautiful, full of life and color and emotion. And in several of them, Caroline had painted self-portraits. Her birthmark featured prominently, transformed into something artistic and beautiful. "She learned to love herself," Eleanor whispered. "She learned to see herself as beautiful." "Yes," William said, "and I wish I'd been there to tell her that. But I can tell you, you are beautiful, Eleanor. Inside and out. Your mother would be so proud of the woman you're becoming." Years later, when Eleanor graduated from art school with honors, both Ruth and William sat in the audience. William had aged, his hair now completely white, but his eyes were as sharp and loving as ever. When Eleanor accepted her diploma, she looked out into the crowd and saw them both, her family, built not from perfect circumstances but from love and second chances. In her valedictorian speech, Eleanor talked about finding beauty in unexpected places, about how a birthmark that once made her feel different had become a source of pride and connection, about how the worst day of someone's life, tied up in a trunk, facing death, had led to one of the best outcomes, a family reunited. "I learned something from my grandfather," she said, looking directly at William, "that it's never too late to change, to grow, to love. He lost his daughter because he couldn't see past his own ideas of who she should be. But when he found me, he chose to be different, to be better. He looked at my face and saw not a flaw, but a connection to the daughter he'd lost. He taught me that our differences aren't weaknesses. They're the things that make us unique and valuable and beautiful." After the ceremony, as they celebrated together, Eleanor pulled William aside. "Thank you," she said simply. "For what?" "For seeing me, for loving me, for being there, for showing me that family isn't just about DNA, it's about showing up and choosing to love someone every single day." William pulled her into a hug, this granddaughter who'd saved his life in more ways than one. "Thank you for giving me a second chance, for letting me be your grandfather. You've given me a reason to be better than I was." As Eleanor looked at her grandmother and grandfather together, this unlikely family forged from tragedy and chance, she understood something profound. Sometimes the worst moments of our lives lead to the best ones. Sometimes salvation comes from the most unexpected places. And sometimes the face we're most afraid to show the world is exactly what brings us home. She thought about that day in the salvage yard. A scared little girl with a birthmark and a man tied up in a trunk. Two people who found each other when they both needed it most. And from that desperate moment had grown something beautiful, a family, love, and the understanding that we're never truly lost as long as there's someone willing to see us for who we really are.